My entire family was standing on my front walk on a Sunday morning, arms crossed, waiting for me to open the door. Instead, I pressed the intercom button and said one sentence. I watched my mother's phone slip out of her hand and hit the concrete. This is her Untold Stories. Hit subscribe if you are new here and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. To understand what led to that Sunday morning, I need to take you back 6 years to the first night shift I worked to save for a house that, in the end, almost wasn't mine to keep. My name is Naomi. I'm 33 and I work as a labor and delivery nurse in Sacramento, a job I love. Even on the nights it wrecks me. I grew up the older of two with my younger brother Tyler, 3 years behind me. Growing up, our roles in the family were never spoken out loud, but everyone understood them anyway. I was the strong one, the responsible one, the daughter who handled things. Tyler was the sensitive one, the one my mother worried over, covered for, and quietly excused. That dynamic didn't change when we became adults. I worked through nursing school, taking double shifts on weekends. Tyler moved back in with our parents twice in his 20s, once after a business idea failed, once after a layoff. Both times, my mother framed it as family helping family. When I mentioned gently that I was also struggling to save money in my 20s, the response was always some version of, "You're handling it fine though. You always do." I stopped expecting help after a while. I just kept working. 6 years ago, after finishing my besom and picking up as many night differentials as my body could tolerate, I saved enough for a down payment on a small 3-bedroom house outside Sacramento. I want to be very specific about this part because it matters enormously for what happens later. I bought that house alone, with my own savings, and the deed was recorded in my name only. Nobody co-signed, nobody contributed a cent. My family treated the house differently than I did from almost the very beginning. At the first Thanksgiving I hosted there, my mother rearranged my kitchen to make more sense without asking. Tyler once joked, only half joking, that the guest room would make a great his and hers office for him and his then girlfriend Brooke. Someday I laughed it off each time. I didn't yet understand that my family had quietly decided my house wasn't fully mine, it was simply the family's house that happened to have my name on the paperwork. 2 years ago, I met my husband Marcus, a paramedic I'd worked alongside on more calls than I could count. We got married last year, and 7 months ago I gave birth to our daughter Ren. My mother was thrilled about the baby. In her way, she came to the hospital. She held Ren. She cried real tears. I let myself believe, for a little while, that having a grandchild might soften some of the old family dynamics. What I didn't know was that while I was still in my first exhausted, sleep-deprived weeks of maternity leave, my mother had already decided how my house was going to be used next, and that this time she wasn't going to ask me at all. Tyler and Brooke had been struggling. Brooke had lost her job during a round of layoffs, and Tyler's contracting work had slowed down for the winter. I felt for them, genuinely, when my mother first mentioned, during a phone call about 5 weeks after Ren was born, that Tyler's family might need somewhere to land for a bit. I said what I thought was a reasonable, boundaried thing. I said I loved them, but with a newborn in the house, we weren't in a position to have anyone else living with us right now, maybe in 6 months, once we'd found our footing. My mother said, of course, that makes sense, and I genuinely believed the conversation was over. It wasn't. 3 weeks later, I was still not fully recovered, still running on fragmented sleep. Still learning how to function as a new parent, my mother called and asked if she could stop by and help tidy up the guest room while I napped with Ren. I said sure, thinking she meant vacuuming, maybe changing sheets. I was asleep for less than 2 hours. When I woke up, there was a moving truck in my driveway. I want you to sit with that image for a second, because I certainly had to. A moving truck in my driveway while I was asleep, exhausted, 7 weeks postpartum, with my newborn in the next room. My mother had let 2 movers into my house using a spare key I'd given her years earlier for emergencies, a key meant for call an ambulance if something happens to me situations, not help my brother move in situations. They had already carried in 3 boxes and had begun disassembling the crib in what was supposed to become Ren's nursery within the next few months to make room, my mother explained cheerfully, for your brother's family's bed frame, just temporarily, until they get back on their feet. I stood in my own hallway, holding my 7-week-old daughter, watching strangers take apart furniture I had assembled myself 2 nights earlier, and I felt something in me go very, very quiet. I didn't yell. I want to be clear about that, because I think it matters. I asked the movers to stop immediately, which they did confused, apologetic, clearly under the impression they'd been hired for a legitimate, agreed-upon move. I asked my mother to step outside with me. On my porch, I asked her directly, did she understand that this was my house, and that she had no right to authorize movers into it without asking me first? Her answer told me everything about how she'd been thinking about my life for years. She said, Naomi, you've always been the strong one. I thought you'd understand that family comes first. Tyler needs this more than you need an empty guest room right now. An empty guest room. Not my house. Not my daughter's future nursery. An empty guest room, as if the space existed for the family's convenience rather than for the life Marcus and I were building inside it. I told the movers, politely, that there had been a miscommunication and that nothing was being moved into this house today. My mother left angry, telling me I was choosing pride over family. I stood in my driveway with my daughter in my arms and watched the truck pull away, and I realized this wasn't going to be a one-time miscommunication. This was a preview. For the next 2 weeks, the calls didn't stop. My mother alternated between guilt reminding me how much she'd sacrificed raising me and pressure, telling me Tyler and Brooke's situation was getting desperate and that a good sister would step up. Tyler himself called once, awkward and clearly coached, saying it would really only be for a couple months, tops. I want to be honest about something here. It wasn't the request itself that broke something in me. Families help each other, and if they'd asked properly, with a real conversation, a real plan, and real respect for the fact that I had a newborn and a household to protect, I might have found a way to help, even temporarily. What broke something in me was the moving truck, the disassembled crib, the absolute certainty on my mother's part that my house was hers to allocate. So I made a decision. I called Marcus at work and told him what had happened. He was understandably furious, but he agreed with the approach I wanted to take, which wasn't loud and wasn't public. It was simply completely firm. The first thing I did was call a locksmith and have every lock in the house changed that same afternoon. The second thing I did was call a family law attorney, not because I expected a lawsuit, but because I wanted, in writing, from a professional, a clear understanding of exactly where I stood. She confirmed what I already knew. As the sole owner of record, I had every legal right to control who entered and lived in my home, and what my mother had done using a spare key to let movers in without my consent could, depending on how it escalated, constitute trespassing. The third thing I did was send one message to the family group chat. I kept it calm and I kept it short. I said that I loved my family, that I understood Tyler and Brooke were going through a hard time, and that I hoped they found a solution soon, but that my home was not available as that solution, now or in the foreseeable future, and that I would not be discussing it further over text or phone. The response was immediate and, in hindsight, predictable. My mother called it cold. My aunt, looped into the chat somehow, called it unchristian. Tyler didn't respond at all. I didn't respond either. I put my phone on silent and I focused on my daughter. What I didn't expect was what happened that following Sunday. At 9 a.m. that Sunday, my doorbell camera lit up with motion alerts, one after another. I looked at my phone and saw my mother, my father, Tyler, and Brooke standing on my front walk along with, unbelievably, the same moving truck from 2 weeks earlier, parked at the curb. My mother rang the doorbell repeatedly. I could hear her voice through the camera speaker, telling me to stop being ridiculous and open this door, that they'd given me enough time to calm down, and that Tyler's family was moving in today, whether I liked it or not. I didn't open the door. I pressed the intercom button instead. I said, calmly, into the speaker, "The locks were changed 2 weeks ago. This house is in my name only. And I already spoke to my attorney this morning after I saw the moving truck outside if anyone attempts to enter. I'm calling the police for trespassing, and I have that conversation with my lawyer in writing if it's needed." That's when I watched, through the camera, my mother's phone slip out of her hand and hit the concrete of my front walk. I don't think she'd truly believed, until that exact moment, that I would actually follow through, that the sister who always handled things for everyone else would ever use that same steadiness against the family instead of for it. Nobody tried the door. After a long, frozen moment, my father put a hand on my mother's shoulder and guided her back toward the cars. Tyler and Brooke stood by the moving truck for a few minutes, clearly unsure what to do with a truck full of boxes and nowhere left to unload them, before eventually driving away as well. I didn't call the police that day because nobody actually tried to force their way in, but I did follow up, in writing through my attorney, with a formal letter to my parents making the boundary unmistakably clear. Any further attempt to access my property without my express written invitation would be treated as trespassing. Full stop. It's been 4 months since that Sunday. My mother and I speak occasionally, carefully, mostly about rent. Tyler and Brooke found a small apartment through a rental assistance program about 6 weeks after that day, help they might have found sooner, honestly, if so much energy hadn't gone into trying to relocate into my guest room instead. We're not close the way we used to pretend we were, but we're honest now, which is more than I can say for most of the last 30 years. Looking back, I think the hardest part wasn't the moving truck, or even my mother's phone hitting the pavement. It was realizing that being called the strong one for most of my life hadn't actually been a compliment. It had been a quiet, ongoing assumption that my needs would always come last, because I was capable of absorbing that without complaint. But I also learnt something that stayed with me ever since. Understanding where someone's expectations come from doesn't obligate you to keep meeting them. I can understand that my mother grew up believing family means sacrificing endlessly for each other, and still refused to raise my own daughter inside that same pattern. Boundaries set calmly, and in writing when they need to be, protect the people you love far better than any argument ever could. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. If your family has ever assumed something of yours was theirs to give away, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments below. I read every single one, and this community has been a genuine source of strength for me through all of this. If you're new here, please consider subscribing to her Untold Stories.